An Alberta lens on what all has been at play this week. We're joined now by Gitane De Silva, a former senior representative for our province to the United States and executive director of the Peter Lougheed